Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
FIFA World Cup is in full.
Okay, Caspian report, preemptive like. Why Qatar spent $220 billion on the FIFA World Cup? Well, my guess is that you want a big billboard, you know? I feel like hosting the World Cup is like a giant billboard, the best billboard of any billboard you can buy to sort of advertise your country. And so, honestly, despite the amount they spent, it might have been a good investment in the end. Who knows? I'm not saying like the stadiums aren't going to like decay like all the other ones do. That's not my point. My point is that now a lot of people who never knew where Qatar existed or like where Qatar was or if it even was a country now know about it. And I think that will pay dividends for sure. I'm no economic person, but let's learn. Let's go. Original link to the video, top of the description. Below that, link to the Discord. Love to have you. Let's go.
Full swing, and it better be. The FIFA World Cup is in full swing, and it better be. Qatar has spent roughly $220 billion on it, which is about 15 times more expensive than the next costliest World Cup. The numbers at play are staggering. Doha has constructed 8 stadiums, 108 hotels, a brand new metro system, and a modern shipping port. It has also expanded its main airport and built a new city from scratch just north of the capital. The list of projects goes on, but not all expenses are financial. Thousands of migrant workers have lost their lives in the process. Even so,
I think it was a Johnny Harris video about that. It was insane. Like how they clearly were just kind of trapping workers from overseas, telling them something else, and then when they get here, it's really crazy when stuff like that goes on. Like, and then everyone, like, I'm doing it right now. I'm like, okay, let's watch a video on this. We're all like, oh my god, and then okay, you know what I mean? Like, what about all the stuff that's going on in China? It's like, or what's happened in Qatar. It's like everyone just at the end of the day, like, gets their, like, oh, that's terrible. How could you do this? Boycott and all this, and then I'm sure it'll be just almost forgotten. Anyways, let's go.
it is a sacrifice Qatar is willing to pay. Settled in a tumultuous region, its neighborly relations are delicate and often tense. Qatar has been invaded again and again. Its capital was destroyed 4 times and part of its territory was taken away. But even within Qatar itself, there are still more fault lines. Only 10% of the total population are natives, and within that minority, over 30 tribes compete in running the country. Yes, in spite of all its wealth, influence and power, Qatar is a tribal society at its core. But to survive in the 21st century, Qatari society needs to reinvent itself. Now it is writing one of history's most expensive national stories.
Like, I heard about this watching a video a few years ago where about I forget if it was like Vanuatu or Nauru or Palau or something like that. But a Pacific Island country that in the 70s or 80s got super, super rich because over hundreds of thousands of years, it had been a common, like, visit spot for ocean-going birds who would constantly poop on it, and over that time build up just basically an enormous amount of bird poop that just happens to be a key ingredient in it that is crucial to fertilizer or something. And so they got super, super rich out of nowhere because they had this giant important thing that rich countries wanted. But they didn't invest in anything, and they spent it like crazy and lived like kings. And then as soon as it was depleted, they went right back to, like, they didn't put any plan in effect. And so essentially Qatar is the same thing, but replace bird poop with oil. And, you know, oil is not always going to be around, or always going to be, or who knows, it likely is going to fade out as important. And so they have to diversify, and advertising from the World Cup wasn't a bad idea. who knows? It wasn't a bad idea. I have no idea if it was a bad idea or not. Let's be real.
Because at heart, nations are made of stories, not atoms. Today's video is sponsored by Ground News. This is the tool I use to stay on top of world events. And if you haven't checked out the In Focus,
make sure if this interests you guys to use the /Caspian. Get the original link to the video, top description, and use their link if that interests you.
newsfeed in their app yet, now is the time. It gives you the latest information on major international events, including the World Cup. In the last 3 months, Ground News has tracked close to 35,000 stories related to the World Cup, including the results of every match and the international implications of the event itself. Not only does this platform give you breaking news from thousands of sources across the globe, it puts related stories in one place so you can compare coverage. For example, I can see how news outlets from around the world covered comments made by the CEO of the World Cup after it was reported that a Filipino man died at a training site. You can see there are 26 news outlets reporting on the CEO's response, most of them leaning
what does that say about us? That like, and I'm not just like pointing blame at anyone, you know, U.S. I'm sure is, but how like that doesn't like stop everything in its tracks. It's like whoa, what happened to this worker? Are we seriously going to you know, treat workers like expendable things, and then we'll just kind of keep moving on, you know? And I get why. I mean, you can't just pull a plug, but at the same time, it's
left politically. Each headline strikes a different tone depending on where the coverage is coming from, and all the articles are just a click away. If you're interested in trying Ground News for yourself and are looking for a unique gift, go to ground.news/Caspian to get 35% off subscriptions during their limited time holiday sale. Qatar has made remarkable progress since its independence, transforming from a backwater desert kingdom into a world-renowned center for media, education, sports, and conflict mediation. It has developed a foreign policy that is independent of its larger neighbors. But Qatari policymakers haven't always been this fortunate. For much of history, Qatar witnessed uninterrupted conquest and subjugation. In the 1720s, the House of Al Thani relocated from Najd to Qatar. They settled in the south before moving to Doha. Later in the 1760s, the Al Khalifa tribe left Kuwait and settled on Qatar's western coast. 2 decades later, a seafaring tribe called the Al Jalahma settled in northern Qatar. As these families put down roots, they inadvertently brought their old transnational tribal rivalries into the peninsula. In the next century, Qatar was subjected to a series of invasions. Whether it was the Al Sabah tribe from Kuwait, the Al Saud from Najd, or the Al Nahyan from Abu Dhabi, Qatar witnessed extraordinary bloodletting. So much so that Doha was destroyed 4 times in the 19th century alone. Being a Qatari tribe member was a dangerous profession at the time. Meanwhile, the Saudis tried to conquer and subjugate Qatar no less than 3 times, each time surviving by the skin of its teeth. Eventually, things came to a halt when the British intervened and forced the major tribes to acknowledge one another's sovereign territories. By playing the role of the mediator, Britain absorbed the Arab tribes into its...
Guys, just, you know, chill out. Give me that oil, but chill. I'm not poking at UK, obviously US too.
Empire. At the same time, the house...
Guys, it's like, Britain, what are you doing here? Why? Sorry.
Of El Thani came to the Arab tribes into its empire. At the same time, the House of El Thani came to dominate political life and occupied the throne. Meanwhile, the El Murra and the El Hawajir tribes had grown to 2/3 of Qatar's total population. In 1971, however, Britain ended Qatar's protectorate status, and as soon as that happened, it was business as usual again. Independence placed Qatar in the crosshairs of its neighbors. First, in 1974, Saudi Arabia seized a 45-kilometer coastal strip that connected Qatar to the United Arab Emirates. Next, in 1986, an old territorial dispute flared up with Bahrain over the Hawar Islands and the Fashdibal coral reefs. The rights to natural resources were at stake, and the full-scale war was narrowly avoided. Later, in 1992, Saudi Arabia attacked and seized a border post by Al Kafus from Qatar. Still later, in 1995, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain, and the UAE joined forces to overthrow Emir Hamad, who himself had seized power from his father a year earlier. Even more troubling, the coup was backed by the El Murra tribe, which goes to show how the interests of transnational tribes often transcend national boundaries. Tribalism runs deep in the region, and Qatar's tribes are more loyal to their kin abroad than to the government in Doha. Even after centuries of coexistence, tribal marriages remain mainly within the family, and there are more than 30 tribes native to Qatar. Sitting at the top of the hierarchy is the ruling El Thani. They control much of the economy and legislation, but as powerful as they are, the House of El Thani cannot rule unilaterally.
It's crazy when, there are like a lot of nations, like some European ones and, say China or India, where I feel like some countries kind of grew up along with industrialization, and some countries just got industrialization thrown on them. And so it seems like by the way, guys, I might not know what the heck I'm talking about. Okay. I'm not an authority here. This is just my thoughts. It should go without saying, but that it's like old world customs thrust in with new world money and technology. And so you have the money to make so many things, but you still have the structure that existed before that money. And so there's going to be some friction, obviously,
Power sharing is a must.
That makes sense.
The Qatari tribes must negotiate with one another to keep things running smoothly. Still worse, of the country's 2.9 million residents, only 10%, or about 350,000 people, are native Qataris.
Jeez.
The rest are expat workers from across Asia. Native Qataris are a minority in their own state. The predominant...
Not just a minority, but a 1 in 10, that's insane.
Expat population is the result of economic and infrastructure expansion. As the state grew and developed, it needed workers to keep pace with the overwhelming progress. Since its population growth, native Qataris have transformed into a supreme caste that look with disdain at much of the expat community. For a state as Qatar, set in a dangerous region...
So it seems like a small amount of people inside of an extremely rich country, thanks to the oil and gas fields around them, that are just them, and then they hire poorer workers from around the world to just do everything else, and just... That's crazy. Huh.
Region having multiple layers of internal fault lines is a death sentence. Thus, to maintain cohesion and keep the country together, Qatar needs a dose of nationalism to overcome its tribal and migrant divisions. It needs to formulate a niche for itself on the world stage. It needs national stories to
Well, no chance they would want any form of democracy there, because you're 1/10 of the country.
itself apart. Qatar has plenty of national achievements already.
Wait, so are 1/10 of the people there like Qatari citizens, and the rest of the population living there is not a Qatari citizen? Or is it that, oh my god, this is no, they're citizens, but they weren't born there, I think.
It hosts Al Jazeera, a media conglomerate that spans the globe. It also hosts Education City, an enormous campus with 8 distinguished universities set at a value of $30 billion. Doha owns Qatar Airways, the 9th largest airline in the world. Plus, it doesn't hurt that Qatar is one of the wealthiest nations in the world, going by GDP per capita. These achievements have brought wealth, influence, and power, but they have done little to modernize or unify its tribal foundations. Fundamentally, Qatar remains small, vulnerable, and without a margin for error.
It's again fascinating seeing a ancient type culture collide with money, and knowing that you have to you have to either choose between keeping that culture and modernizing, right? So this is what I mean. Like it took centuries and centuries in Europe, or places in Asia, of like wars and all this stuff that went alongside a lot of innovation that went with government and was infused with the economy. And the economy would change, and the government would change, and the culture would change. But now it's just like slamming a country that didn't evolve with the technology. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's so fascinating.
A single catastrophe could bring everything down. Ergo, to secure a lasting truce, Qatar needs to equip its native citizens with the tools of modernity and integrate them into Qatar's expat-run economy. Developing a sports culture is seen as the remedy.
The Meiji Restoration is a perfect example. Like that is all. That's all I have to say. Meiji Restoration, right? That was the time where Japan was basically like, look, whether you like it or not, these countries and their technology is the way of the future. And if we want any chance at all, we have to adopt that. And so Japan really seemed, in terms of historical lengths of time, really cut the umbilical cord quick with their old ways, while keeping some stuff and just embracing more Western technology. And it's still going on,
that
clearly.
Athletics can bring the native youth together and nurture a unified identity beyond tribal fealties. Nations develop organically when a community with specific cultural traits adopt symbols that reflect those traits. Sports, with its flags, anthems, and signs, is a constant reminder of politics and thus a tool of soft power. The Olympics is basically a marketing tool for countries to make themselves look good. But sports can also be highly emotional. People will riot and set things on fire just because their favorite team lost. Tournaments can take spectators on an emotional roller coaster. Sports can also serve as a vessel for reconciliation and goodwill. In 1995, Nelson Mandela's appearance in the Rugby World Cup final transformed the sport into a platform for national reconciliation. During the 1970s, the American ping pong team was sent to play against communist China. The exchange served as an icebreaker for Nixon's visit to China a year later. But sometimes sports and politics go the other way, like when Colin Kaepernick...
Yeah, it's like, if you're wondering, wait, how could this possibly be good? Look how much money they're spending. No way they're going to make a profit. You're not, I don't think you're quite thinking about on the level that they're thinking. They don't expect to turn a profit. they want. It's like asking, why would a company put a commercial on during the Super Bowl? It's like they don't get any immediate money, but they get noticed, and if you get noticed, then that opens a lot of possibilities for a lot more money, you know?
Started taking a knee to protest police brutality in the United States. Benign or aggressive, the link between sports and nationalism.
Sorry, I fast forward, sorry.
But sometimes sports and politics go the other way, like when Colin Kaepernick started taking a knee to protest police brutality in the United States. Benign or aggressive, the link between sports and nationalism is inescapable. And even though Qatari athletes have little to boast about, cultures measure achievements differently. Take the UAE's space program as an example. In 2020, the Emiratis launched a probe to Mars, but the UAE had not designed or built the probe. Japan had assisted them. Notwithstanding, using foreign technology did not detract from the achievement itself. The same principle applies to Qatar. It does not matter how many medals or trophies Qatari athletes bring back home, the achievement is in imagining, wanting, and doing. Qatar's nation-building program will take years to override its tribal foundations, but to secure its sovereignty and independence, Qatar needs national stories to set itself apart from its all too belligerent neighbors. For Doha, a distinct national identity means a break from history. It will allow the state to be at the table for once rather than on the menu.
Like, do you want to hold on to your national identity and culture and possibly just sink into irrelevance? Or do you want to give up a lot of it in order to have more control? You know what I mean? What do I know? Okay, I'm just thinking things. And I'd love to see what you guys think in the comments. All right, guys? Great video from Caspian Report. Awesome channel. I know I talked a lot, but I had a lot to say, I guess, and ask. I can't wait to see your guys' comments and answers to some of my questions if I did have some. And I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.